Okay, so I'd like to introduce our next speaker to you. We've got Dr. Luke Smith. Experiencing changes in your thinking, memory, processing speed can be very challenging. And Dr. Smith is a clinical neuropsychologist. He works privately in the community, including consulting in Victoria and Tasmania. Prior to gaining qualification as a neuropsychologist, Luke worked as a behaviour management consultant for Alzheimer's Australia, both in Victoria and South Australia. So Luke has a research and clinical interest in progressive neurological conditions, particularly those affecting younger people. He's got a passion for education and skills training in the progressive neurological disease area. And his presentation is focused on real take-home strategies that can help you manage with thinking and memory issues. So welcome, Luke.
Thanks everyone, and thanks Nicola, and a big thank you to MS Limited for inviting me today. Before I started, I wanted to just share a story from last night. I flew in, got in at about 9:30 and got into a taxi with a really lovely taxi driver, and he asked me what I was doing in town and mentioned that I was presenting today. And I think it's interesting, he mentioned that his sister had MS. It shows you how we're kind of all connected. And he sort of talked about his sister a bit, and it was interesting, this sort of theme about my invisible MS really came through to me. He'd said, I really love my sister, but she's become more stubborn over time. And when we unpicked that a bit, it was actually that, interestingly, she'd had more trouble solving problems over time. It was really interesting when we kind of went down to it and talked about it. That seemed to be this change that she had experienced. She was having more trouble thinking her way through problems, and people were interpreting this as stubborn. So I wonder how much you guys get that your invisible MS symptom is interpreted in a different way. You're being stubborn or being lazy, something like that. The taxi driver was also quite funny because I also talked about our speakers today, including Professor Lechner Scott. Also said there was going to be something about robotics. And then I explained to him what I did, and he said, and they invited you to present. So thanks, taxi driver, appreciate that. I don't know about you, but in that last talk, all the drugs ended with a bub or a mub. That's about all I got from the drug one. But what I did want to talk about today was a bit about MS in the brain, and not go too much into that, given how well that was covered already. I'm going to talk a bit about changes in cognition. Cognition is just a fancy word for thinking and memory skills, but most of you probably know that. And then, as Nicola mentioned, I really want to give you some take-home things to do, some take-home strategies. I don't know if you've ever been to those talks before at conferences where they presented the last slide and you've said, I could have just had that. That would have been fine. Everything else didn't quite get. So today is very much a practical type of talk. I'm not going to be talking about cutting-edge research. What I'm going to be talking about is cognitive strategies that research shows can work for you, particularly in things like your day-to-day life, but also in cognitive rehabilitation. I'm going to talk about memory strategies, and then I'm going to give you a particularly good strategy for executive functioning. So just to refresh, today I'm particularly talking about the brain, and for those who don't know, neuropsychologists are really psychologists that specialise in brain functioning. And what I particularly wanted to talk about which was a real learning experience for me early in my career, is that at any one time, most research shows that about 40 to 65% of people with MS are having thinking and memory difficulties, cognitive difficulties. So obviously that's not going to mean everyone in this room. And what research also tells us that it's not how much MS you have in your brain, which the professor alluded to before, but where it's located in your brain that's important. I have seen many people with MRIs where they have a lot of pathology in their brain, but on thinking and memory testing, they're actually doing quite well. So it's the location rather than how much, which is really important. Because your brain's a bit like a car. Different parts of your car are responsible for different things. And it's a bit like your brain works in that way as well. So today I also want to really concentrate on the changes that can occur for people with MS, but I want to make it really clear that this isn't necessarily the case for you. Okay, this isn't necessarily going to happen for you. This isn't necessarily your situation right now. So I think I've got the question later, but just for a quick show of hands, has anyone ever seen a neuropsychologist before in this room? Okay, so not many people. for those poor victims that have seen a neuropsychologist in the room, the assessment that I would do for you if you came to me to try and work out if and how MS was affecting your thinking memory would take about 3 or 4 hours. And the reason why is that your brain is very complex. You know that. And for me to measure your memory functioning, I don't just give you one memory test, I give you 2 or 3. So it's really important that when we're talking about changes in thinking and memory, that if you can have an assessment of your thinking and memory, that doesn't just need to be with a neuropsychologist, that can be with a neurologist, with an OT. But getting that idea about if and how it's affecting you is important. Now, I know that in working with people with MS, they often talk about these thinking and memory problems as a brain fog. Is that what you guys think of it as? Yeah. If I use the word brain fog in my training, I wouldn't look as smart, and using words like Tamalzabob. So I'm going to break down this brain fog for you into different areas and how it might be affecting you. The first one is what we call a change in information processing speed, or a change in thinking speed. How quickly you can think is directly correlated with the white cells in your brain. And they are the cells in your brain that are a bit like the wires that connect up your brain cells. And we know that they are particularly susceptible to MS. And you can imagine as MS is causing that inflammation and the damage to the myelin, the messages just aren't getting through as quickly. So a change in thinking speed, how quickly you can process information, can be a very early sign and symptom of MS. It could also be that you had 2 glasses of red wine last night and stayed up late, but it can be a symptom of MS too. Do you think the world is getting faster or slower? I think it's getting faster as well. I was in the plane last night looking around at everybody, and nearly everybody was on their phone or on a computer. The world is getting faster. So if your thinking speed is slower than it was before or getting slower, the world can feel even faster than that. The next one is the domain of attention and concentration. The first one I want to talk about is attention span. And by attention span, that's not like if you were like me when you're a kid and the teacher says you have the attention span of a goldfish. Attention span is actually how much information you can take in at any one time, without repetition, without further explanation. Now, the average adult, regardless of their gender or their ethnicity around the world, can take in about 7 bits of information, plus or minus 2. So that's about 5 to 9 bits of information. For someone with MS, if this is an issue for you, you might only be able to take in 3 bits of information at one time. So you can imagine when you're seeing a friend at the cafe and you say to them, how's your week been? They say, well, the other day I picked up the boys from school and they're really sick, unfortunately. Then I had to pick up the dog. I think it's got a broken leg at the moment. Oh, did you see that movie the other night on Netflix? It's gone. Because not only are they talking quickly, they're giving you a lot at one time. The next one is what we call sustained attention. This is your ability to be able to concentrate for longer periods of time. This is particularly affected by fatigue, if you're experiencing that fatigue. And I don't know about you, but I actually don't think people without MS know what it's like to be fatigued. In talking with people with MS when they experience that fatigue, I just think that people don't really understand what you're talking about and how that affects you. But also when you're not fatigued, sometimes people's concentration, they just can't concentrate for as long. So when I'm doing that 3 or 4 hour assessment, I watch people's concentration just kind of weave in and out as people are focusing on me and then losing track. The last one is divided attention. This is what you might think of as multitasking. Interestingly, our brains can't actually do 2 things at once. What our brains do is that they very quickly switch back and forth between things. So imagine when you're driving, you're looking at the road, you are then checking your blind spot, you're then checking your speed, you're then listening to the radio, constantly switching your concentration back and forth between things. Now, for the blokes in the room who've been accused of bad multitasking, research shows that actually that shouldn't be the case. If you're like me, it might be when the sport is on. But generally, for men and women, we do have an equal ability to multitask. But unfortunately with MS, particularly if you're experiencing this type of pathology in your frontal lobes, in the front part of your brain, you can have trouble dividing your attention, trouble multitasking. The next area is called working memory. Have you guys ever heard of that before, working memory? Okay, a few people are nodding. Working memory is something we don't often talk about, but it's incredibly important. So working memory is your ability to hold information in your mind whilst manipulating it, whilst working with it. So I have something to confess. When I go to the supermarket, where I buy my polluted foods. Thank you for that, by the way. Makes me feel much better now. Is that I am one of those people that after I have finished buying my groceries, I look at the checkout person suspiciously while I'm checking my docket to see whether I got that discount on my ice cream or not. And I already feel the rage building if I didn't get that discount. The way that I work out that discount is through my working memory, is I'm holding the information in my mind, using mental arithmetic to understand that. And that's why often when people with MS talk to me, when I ask them, have you noticed any changes in your thinking and memory? They often say to me, in a busy room, if there's lots going on, I start to feel really overwhelmed. It's because their brain's saying to them, there's too much going on. I can't focus on everything that's going on. Visuospatial processing, you see I do get to use fancy words today. Visuospatial processing is your brain's ability to be able to understand, integrate, use visual information. So who here in the audience has a dog? Does anyone have a dog? I do have a dog. Yep. What is your dog's strangest smell? Strongest thing, smell. Sorry, I ruined that one. But if you look at your dog's brain, in its brain there's a huge cortex, a huge part of that brain dedicated just to smell. What's our dominant sense? Vision. So if you look at our brain, over half of our brain is actually dedicated just to vision. Without your brain, your eyes are actually blind. Your eyes take in the raw data, but it's your brain that allows you to understand it. So you can imagine that if this is a change for you and you're a bricklayer or an architect or an artist or like me, a try-hard handyman, then this can be really frustrating because not only is the IKEA furniture impossible to put together, it becomes more impossible to put together because your brain can't piece together how that A goes into B. There's two particular areas I wanted to focus on today, though, that people often ask me about. And remember, I'm talking very much here in generalities when it comes to your condition, because everybody is so different. So you'll notice that I've called this area not just memory, but learning and memory. So for the purpose of the talk today, I want you to think of memory as 3 stages. The first, learning, is taking in information, like you're doing right now, or hopefully doing right now if you're not asleep yet. The second part is storing it in your brain like a computer. The third part is remembering. The act of remembering is actually taking information out of your stored memory. So often, particularly in the early stages of MS, people talk about a memory problem, and I believe them. But often I confuse them afterwards by saying you don't have a memory problem, you have a learning problem. You can imagine that if your thinking speed is slower, if your concentration's not as good, if your working memory's not as good, then you're just not taking as much information in. When you go looking for it, it's not there, and you think, oh, I forgot it. But it's not that you forgot it. It's the fact that it never got it in there in the first place. When we talk about remembering, the act of pulling that information out of our memory, there are 2 different sort of areas I want to talk about today that are important. The first is free recall memory. And a free recall memory question might be, when's your next doctor's appointment? The next one is called recognition memory. If I say to you, is your doctor's appointment on Thursday, Friday or Saturday? And you get that light bulb, oh, Thursday, that's right, Thursday. When people are experiencing an actual memory problem with MS, often it's this first one that's the issue. Free recall memory. When you're asked to remember something off the top of your head without any prompting at all. But often when that prompt comes, your ability to get it, to remember it, people often say to me, it's not that I've forgotten, it just takes me a while to remember it. So it's important to recognise that if you are experiencing a memory difficulty, it usually is this first one rather than the other one. And in fact, in my experience, when I'm involved in diagnosing the thinking memory symptoms of MS, if people have a recognition memory problem, a forgetting problem, my first thought is, I don't think this is MS. We need to look at something else. The next one is long-term memory. Obviously, as MS progresses for some people, they start to become concerned about their memory. Am I going to remember who I am? Am I going to remember my family? Yes is the answer. Your long-term memory, in fact, is one of the strongest abilities. It's one of those abilities that is more resilient to MS than any other because it's stored diffusely within your brain. What I mean, it's not just stored in one part of your brain. It's stored in lots of parts of your brain. Okay? The next one is called executive functioning. Have you guys ever heard of that before? Okay. if you do understand executive functioning perfectly, let's swap positions, because even neuropsychologists don't quite get this all the time. It's difficult because this covers a wide area, but just to put it plainly, it's the more complicated parts of your thinking and memory. The first area I really want to raise straight away is insight. Have you guys ever heard of that as a neurological symptom? Isn't that fascinating? So, to demonstrate insight, I'm going to give you a riddle. I'm going to get you to use your executive functioning to solve this. So, if you break your leg, what part of your body tells you you're in pain? What part of your body tells you there's a problem? So you guys are way too switched on. Someone always says leg and then I get to look smart. Yes, it is brain. You are right. Brain. Without your brain, a bit like your eyes can't see anything without your brain. Your leg doesn't feel anything without your brain. So when you go to your doctor and the doctor says, you've broken your leg, you need to keep off for 6 to 8 weeks, you need to wear the moon boot, don't drive, what part of your body allows you to understand that information and relate it back to your broken leg? Your brain. Good. Okay. What part of your body tells you there's something wrong with your brain? But that's the problem. You see, if you have a neurological condition, sometimes your brain is not actually telling you what is wrong. Or, if it is, it's not allowing you to link up what that means for you. This is a cause of conflict for people with MS in their relationships, with their doctors, with their families. Because people with MS get accused of being in denial. You're in denial of your MS. How can you be in denial of MS? You experience it every day. The idea being is that, unfortunately for some people with MS, it's their brain that doesn't quite allow them to understand the depth of the issues they're facing or piece it all together. And guess what? That's not your fault. And that's the difference with denial. So in denial, you need to be aware of something to deny. So for example, if I had a friend who's a drinking problem, and I know they have a drinking problem, and they know they have a drinking problem, they say, oh, I don't have a problem, I'm fine. That's denial. When we're talking about changes in insight because of MS, it's not denial because there's nothing there to deny. The brain often is not aware of these things. Does that make sense, guys? I want to really reinforce that it's not your fault if this is an issue for you. This is a symptom like any other of MS, but something we don't often talk about. The next one is idea generation, which is how many ideas you can come up with quickly. So the test that I give to people when they do this is animal naming. One of the tests, and that's tell me as many animals as you can as quickly as you can. Have you guys ever had that before? Yeah, okay. People groaned when they said that. I quite enjoyed it. The next one is inhibiting automatic responses. And sometimes when I do these talks, I actually give people something called the Stroop test. You may have done before, which is where you have to see the words written down in different coloured ink, and you have to tell me the colour of the ink and not read the word. What this is that we, particularly in our frontal lobes and the subcortical parts of our brain, we have a system which inhibits automatic thinking. By the way, we all do this. You can imagine what was going through my head last night when the taxi driver said, and they asked you to present. The word started with F and ended with something after that. But I didn't say it because I have this ability to be able to look at what I'm thinking almost automatically and choose whether I'm going to say it or not. But what if that changes? And for some people with MS, that is a change. They find themselves saying or doing things with going, oh, did I just say that? More often than they'd like. A gentleman said to me the other day, things go through to the keeper a lot more. I love that saying. It's a great Australianism. So that can happen as well. The next one is reasoning and problem solving, which is what this taxi driver's sister seemed to be experiencing. She appeared to have more difficulty considering the outcomes of the problems she was trying to solve, the decisions she was trying to make. And the last one is planning and organising, which is not just your ability to plan and organise your day, but it's literally the filing system that works in your brain. So when we take in information, whether it's things we hear, things we see, our brain organises this in a certain way, like a filing cabinet. And sometimes that free recall problem, that ability just to think off the top of your head, remember off the top of your head, is because your filing system, you've put the K's in the F. You've put things that should have been 2017 and 2002. So that filing system, when the information comes in, sometimes cannot work as well. I want to really reinforce at this stage that some of you may be identifying now with some of these changes that you're hearing about. And rather than treating that as a scary thing, treat it as a positive thing, because that's showing that you have insight. into the fact that some of these changes might be for you, and therefore you might feel empowered to do something about it. And to be honest with you, that's the most important part of today, is the strategies. But before we go there, so I asked before, has anyone seen a neuropsychologist before? Let me take that a step further. Has anyone had a thinking and memory assessment before? A cognitive assessment before? Oh.
We do it yearly.
Okay, apparently you do it yearly. Yeah. There was a slightly strangled look on the professor's face then, so. Okay. Why this is important, maybe I'm biased, but one of the biggest invisible parts of MS is changes in your thinking and memory. And not only do we not have a blood test to diagnose MS, we don't have a blood test to diagnose your memory, and we probably will never find one of them. So the way that we can tell if there's changes in your thinking and memory, if as part of a relapse you're also having, because that can occur, having thinking and memory symptoms as part of that relapse, it's really important that you do have a thinking and memory assessment. Whether that's through a cognitive screen, which is like a shorter test that takes 5 to 10 minutes, but it's really important that you have that mapped over time, because this gives us a better idea about this invisible symptom of MS. It also, more importantly, I would argue, then tells us, where can we go with this? What strategies can we use? Otherwise, you are flying a bit blind in terms of trying to work out what strategies are going to help my thinking and memory. Also, what might surprise you, like this person I saw early in my career, is that you may not have any changes in thinking and memory. Consider that 40 to 65% of people, so not everybody, have those changes. And sometimes it might actually be the fatigue overlaying, or as the professor said before, you might have some mental health symptoms that are impacting on your thinking and memory but not going to permanently hurt them. Does that make sense? So before we go into these thinking memory strategies, I have a couple of disclaimers. The first is, I don't have MS. I don't know what it's like to live with a condition, and I can only imagine it. So when you're looking at some of these strategies today, if you think, Luke, that's a load of crap, that's not going to work for me, you have absolute right of reply today. So don't take these passively. Take them with a grain of salt. The other one is, we are actually going to today, if you want to, we're going to practice some of these strategies. And if you don't do well at them, that doesn't mean that you have a thinking and memory problem in that area. Okay? Some of these strategies take a while to learn. And when I'm doing sessions with people, sometimes it's not till session 3 or 4 that we actually start to get really what this strategy is and how it works. The other thing I really want to warn you against is brain training. Not so much warn you against it, but tell you a bit about the research around it. And that is that brain training, from the research we have currently, makes you good at one thing: brain training. The research to date, there is no real convincing evidence to say that by doing online computer-based game training, that's going to generate to the rest of your life. Meaning that if you do a brain training memory game, it's then going to make you better at remembering a shopping list. Okay? Now, if you like doing brain training, keep doing it. Okay? Because it's not going to hurt you, and sometimes it can be fun, and it gives you that feeling that you're doing something about your thinking and memory. But if you're someone who doesn't like brain training, and your significant other is forcing it down your throat, you have permission to quote me today. Also, if you're being forced to do 10 crosswords a day and Sudokus a day, you have permission once again to say you've had professional opinion that you don't have to do that necessarily. If you like doing it, do it. But what we know is that there are strategies that can help, and guess what really also helps with your thinking memory skills? What you're doing today. Do you know that socialising, we think, is actually incredibly important for your brain health, including for people with MS? Talking with people, seeing people, that connectedness you have, we are neurobiologically wired to socialise, to see each other. So if you are going to do brain training, do it with somebody and have a chat about it. So, the first area of strategies I want to talk about is strategies for attention and concentration. The first one is about reducing distraction. So, in other words, if you do have difficulties with your working memory, difficulties with dividing your attention, as soon as you have lots of distraction, noise, busyness in your environment, you're asking your brain to do something it doesn't want to do. So in other words, this is called the shut up rule. You have my clinical permission to say to people, shut up. I'm trying to do this, can you shut up? Particularly if you're having an important decision to make, if you're trying to concentrate on something, turn off the phone, turn off your smartphone, turn off the radio, turn off the television, put the newspaper down, concentrate on the one thing. The next one is about taking breaks. For people with MS, particularly early in their journey with illness, particularly some blokes I've worked with, they've often talked about pushing through the fatigue. If you ever managed to do that, can you tell me? Because you just discovered something no one else can do. If you are feeling fatigued, if your concentration you think is not as good, you need to take a break. And what I suggest to people is program it into your day, usually in the afternoon. Because this will allow you to be sharper with your thinking and memory. You can't just push through these things that easily. The next one is about managing your fatigue and mood. We know that for people with MS, and I'm preaching to the converted, is that there are higher rates of mental health issues for people with MS. So if your mood is low, if you are particularly worried about something, this will compound the thinking and memory problems you might already have. We're fortunate in Australia, we have really great health professionals that can help you with your mood. Psychiatrists, psychologists, counsellors. We know this is treatable. So if it's going for longer than you would like, or your family would like, or your friends would like, go and get some help. It's not admitting a weakness, it's just saying, I'm going to go and get this treated like I do the rest of my MS symptoms. But the one there on top is chunking. Have you guys ever heard of chunking before? Chunking, where you break down a huge piece of information, so remember that attention span problem, a huge piece of information down into smaller parts. This is how people around the world remember pi. You know the numbers in pi? They keep going and going and going and going. The people that can remember it use chunking, and we're going to do it right now, okay? If you want to do this, you can. If you want to just sit back, you're welcome to, but it's just a bit of fun. I don't know about you, but this is what my shopping list usually looks like. So you can see on this shopping list right here, we've got muesli, shaver, cheese, bread, crumpets, milk, yogurt, shampoo, soap. So I want you to spend just 10 seconds reading that list right now. I'm not going to give you very long. I want you to be really quick in reading that list for me. Now remember it. You can either write it down or just try and say it to yourself. Try not to look at your notes if you do have my notes in front of you. Okay, just for the sake of time, we'll keep moving. But when you're trying to learn that information, when you're trying to take it in, that's a lot of information to take in. That is actually above or just on the limit of someone's attention span at the higher end. So when you look at information, so much information at one time, you can do a couple of things. You can either break it down into smaller groups. So like with a phone number, rather than saying 0455 555 555, you can break it down into 0455 555 555. We naturally do that. But there's something else you can do. And this is my challenge to you. I want you to group these grocery items into groups that have something in common. Now, I've got a way of doing it. You might have your own way. But try again. So have a look at them. And as you're looking at them, try and find groups where there's similarities between items. It might be where it is in the house. It might be the meal you have it for, what you use it for. When you're looking at it, try and apply that now if you can. Okay. Now try remembering it again. So remember, even if you're having difficulty doing this, this doesn't mean that you have a thinking memory problem in that area. This is not an easy task. It took me a few times to get it, to be honest. So how did you go, guys? What method did you find to chunk these things, to bring them into groups, to break down the information? Starting letter. Geez, I like that. Nice. Bathroom and breakfast. Anyone else? A time of day. Excellent, guys. So we had starting letter. It sounds like bathroom, breakfast, and then we also had time of day. So there's no wrong way of doing this. It's just a matter of doing it. And you'll see mine. So I broke mine up into breakfast, bathroom routine, and dairy. Okay? So muesli, bread, crumpets, shaver, soap, shampoo, milk, cheese, yogurt. Research shows us that if you do this, you will have a greater ability to learn and remember this information. You are bringing in a structure. You are chunking this information. It is not chaos now. And naturally, our brains do that. It's interesting that everyone had their own method, but their brains almost unconsciously started to organise this stuff. But if you do it consciously, if you start to organise it yourself, you'll have greater success than just trying to remember it off the top of your head. So well done, everyone. Okay. Now, the next one I'm going to talk about is memory strategies. The first is around learning techniques. You've already used one of them, that's chunking. The other one that I really like is stories. I would argue that our brains are wired for stories. And if you can create that shopping list into a story, you will also may have more chance of remembering it. So using that idea of food again, if, for example, I was going to make spaghetti bolognese, rather than just thinking, I need spaghetti, I need onion, I need garlic, I need meat, I need tomato sauce, if I actually try and remember that in a recipe, or if I try and remember that in a story about who I'm cooking for tonight, there's a greater chance that I will remember it. Once again, I'm adding meaning and structure to the information that I'm learning. Research tells us that using external aids is actually more helpful than me teaching you fancy little rhymes to use. Even though they can be useful for some people, what we call mnemonics, using, crazy, a diary and a calendar is actually more effective in helping your memory, in triggering your memory. So who here has a diary? Yep. It doesn't matter what type of diary you use, whether it's electronic, whether it's on paper, it's just what works for you. But it's important to be targeted about the diary you do use. So for example, my diary, I use a paper one, I don't use an electronic one, and mine has a day per page. If I just had all my week on a page, it would look like chaos, because I write everything down in that diary. Who here uses a calendar on the wall? Great. If you are going to use a calendar, it's important you look at it. I'm saying that because lots of people have calendars they never look at. So where's the two parts of your house where you look at the most? Fridge, and there's another one. Back of the dunny door. Can I say research supports that, by the way? That's not just a saying. So having it there means you will look at it. There's no point in having a diary or a calendar unless you look at it. Notes and notepads can be very useful, but you need to have all your notes together. I've walked into people's house with MS. It's like something out of a movie. There are like notes everywhere. There is no organisation to this. So keep a notepad. Keep a notebook. Don't just keep loose leaf notes around. Next one is whiteboards. I love whiteboards. Not only for triggering your memory, but also so that your family and friends can leave you messages. Once again, the best place for a whiteboard is going to be on the fridge or the back of the dunny door. You can get whiteboards that are quite cheap. You don't need to get expensive ones, but find one that works for you. But the last one, which is actually a technique I use, and one from the MS research suggests can work quite well, is imagery. Have you guys ever heard of that memory technique before, the imagery technique? Well, good news, we're going to do it right now. So we've got three grocery items, which may look familiar. We've got bread, we've got shampoo, and we've got cheese. Now, this particular method is called the method of loci, which sounds a bit like a Nordic god, but it is a real thing. The method of loci basically is, I'm going to ask you, before we start, I'm going to give the instruction, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes, think about your home or the place where you live, and I'm literally going to ask you to see putting these objects in special places around your home. If it's not around your home, it can be one room, like your kitchen or your bathroom. So what I want you to do is close your eyes for me. If you want to, you don't have to, but close your eyes. I want you to visualize your home or the place where you currently live. I want you to visualize yourself going through each room or going through just one room, if that's easier. And I'm going to ask you to pick a special location in each room for the bread, the shampoo, and the cheese. So first we're going to use the bread. I want you to see the bread in your hand while you're in your home or where you live. And now you're going to be placing that bread in its special location in your home wherever you want it to be. Next, you have the bottle of shampoo in your hand. Once again, I want you to visualize in your home where you are placing the shampoo in its special location. And finally, the cheese. The cheese is now in your hand. You are finding a special place in your room or your house, and you are placing it in that special location. Okay, guys, thank you. Open your eyes. Now, when we do this technique in the clinic, we actually repeat it a few times. The more that you repeat it, the more it's easy to remember. But why this is so effective is that as I was asking you to see in your home where you're putting these objects, the same part of your brain is lighting up as if you're actually doing it. So your brain actually has difficulty telling the difference between me saying, trying to think of an apple in your head, and actually looking at an apple. So what this does is that rather than remembering a list or words, it actually gives you visual imagery. And then when you go and do the shopping, when you're remembering the shopping list, all you need to do is walk through your house. Walk through the special location. When I do this, and I do use this technique personally, I try and keep it real. So the bread goes in the pantry, the shampoo goes in the shower where I keep it, and the cheese goes in my fridge. Because then I know I can walk through my house very easily. And keep in mind, your long-term memory will be quite strong. If you've been living in your house or your home for a while, you should be able to remember most of those locations quite well. Okay. Now, executive functioning, as I said before, is an area that covers lots of different parts of your thinking memory. But research shows that one particular strategy can be really useful. And it's something that some of you might do naturally, but if you use it consciously, it can really help. So this is called goal, plan, do, review, or review and revise. Have you guys ever heard of that one before? Sounds like something you get at a marketing meeting, doesn't it? So, using the example of the shopping list, I'm going to use my shopping list to cook dinner. What's my goal? Cook dinner. But the planning part of this is also around not just what you're going to do, but looking at the potential barriers, the issues that you might face, and how you might overcome them. So anticipating those problems. It also talks about the resources you're going to need. So if I'm going to cook dinner, what sort of resources am I going to need to be able to do that? I'm going to need my ingredients. What else might I need? Yeah, so I've heard where you're going to cook it. I heard pots and pans. Good. Energy to cook it. Excellent. Yeah, we do need that resource, don't we? Maybe a recipe book. So this is part of my planning. Time is also really important. And I would argue that you need to be careful with time, because with MS, slowing of thinking speed is quite a common thinking memory symptom. So if you're saying, I'm going to get this all done in 20 minutes. So it's really important to be mindful of time when you're planning how you're going to cook dinner. What barriers might there be? If you're like me, not following the recipe and just going freelance. But it might be that you need help. You might need some further resources to be able to do that. Do you have good access in your kitchen? How are you going to be able to get to the supermarket? Do you need to go to the local supermarket that's busy, or do you want to go to a smaller one where you're not using your divided attention as much? If it was me, I'd choose my recipe, I'd create my shopping list, or I'd use my imagery to put it in my mind. I'd buy my groceries and I'd prepare and serve dinner. Now, the doing part seems quite straightforward, doesn't it? I'm just going to cook dinner. But it's important when we're doing the goal, plan, do, review planning, we're doing this beforehand, that we ask, in my situation, my wife for help. Because I always ask my wife for help when I'm cooking. But it's not just about getting it done, it's also about who you might need to help you with it, or resources you need, and also what's going to be your reward for doing this task. Because usually when we do goal, plan, do, review, it's not for something you like doing, it's usually for something you're having difficulty with or you don't like doing. When we do the review and revise, we talk about what went well, what did I learn, what could I have done better. Now, choosing making dinner as a topic might seem a bit plain for this type of thing. Why are you putting so much effort into it? But I can tell you that when I'm working with people with MS, even though they might be having frustrations at work if they're employed, usually it's their day-to-day when they tell me they're experiencing their most frustrations. I have done goal plan review, revise with someone who was a mother, a mum with MS, and she was feeling the loss of not being able to make dinner on time in the right way for her kids, because that was a big part of her being a mum. So even though this might seem a bit menial, for her, this is the area she wanted to work on. And after about 3 goes at this, she started doing goal plan, do review just herself and started successfully making dinner. And that is a real gain in terms of her journey with MS. So you can see in terms of the strategies, there's lots of different ones you can use. I've only just touched on the tip of the iceberg of these types of areas. But there is a really great information sheet called the Cognition Fog Information Sheet, which is actually on the MS website. Now, this is probably one of the best resources I have found in terms of easy to understand information, something you can read relatively quickly. And I'm not just saying that because MS Limited invited me today. I'm saying that because it is the best help sheet that I have found when I've been online. So if this you think is an issue for you, or you have any further questions, I'd really encourage you to seek a health professional who's going to be able to do an assessment of your thinking and memory skills, and then maybe give you a bit of advice around how you can manage this, because this will help reduce one of those invisible issues that people with MS talk about. Thank you.
We're very close to tea break, but I think we've got time for just 2 quick questions if anybody would like to ask Luke. So we've got the lady over there. Have we got somebody who could run with the microphones, a volunteer?
Hello.
Hi.
Hear me?
Yeah.
Look, I've been a teacher for over 30 years and I've just retired, and I found my organisational skills at work were very, restricted.
Yeah.
And I went through a lot of hard times at work. What I'm wondering is, I think I went through the MS denial and also the inability to organise my thoughts and remember things and put importance on things that were important.
Yeah.
So my question is, my thing was, I always said, it's just age. I'm getting old. I know we all say that, but how relevant is that in your assessment of MS? Because I thought, well, we are all getting old, and I do have an MS, so where does one overlap the other, and how important is, well, not even how important, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Thanks.
I know all of that. And look, it's a really common question and a great example. So the first one is that when we talk about measuring thinking and memory, as a neuropsychologist, which is my expertise, there's a few things that take into consideration if I was going to assess your thinking and memory skills. The first is your educational level. The second is how old you are. And the third usually is your gender. And the reason why is that as we get older, usually our thinking and memory skills in particular areas do become less efficient, which is what the professor was sort of talking about before. But if I gave you a memory test to see whether this was normal ageing or maybe symptoms of MS, I actually compare your memory test performance with people like you. I compare it to a large group of people of the same age and where I can a similar level of education, where I can the same gender. So that's how we differentiate. We compare you to you. Now, the good cognitive screens, which are the shorter thinking memory tests that other health professionals use, if they don't have that, what we call normative data, they're comparing you with you, it can be hard. It can be harder to tell that. The other thing that I also look at is what we call your pre-morbid intellectual functioning. Such a great word. It means before you got MS, where should your thinking and memory skills have been? Because we're all different. We all have strengths and weaknesses, me included. And sometimes, like people, I say to people, your mental arithmetic's got worse, and then the wife looks at me and goes, "Are you serious? He couldn't add up 2 + 2 before MS." So we also have tests, things like the look at your long-term memory, things that look at your vocabulary, things that look at your general knowledge, certain types of reading. These are more resilient to MS occurring within the brain. So the only real way we can know is by doing that type of testing. Does that answer the question? Okay.
Luke's around during tea break, aren't you, Luke? And he's happy to take some questions then.